we have to close this back.
Could you just do the share?
Yeah, do it.
I'll do it.
Okay.
Like that?
Yeah. No, not enough yet. No, still bad.
Good.
Still weird. The lighting, still weird. Okay, there, you gotta go. Yeah, it's weird. Hey, everybody. Sound.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Hey, everybody. Everybody feeling good?
So
Any-
far,
Any more people getting vaccinated? Any vaccination update?
I got vaccinated last week.
Excellent. How are you
We
feeling?
had the second on Wednesday.
I'm feeling fine. My arm was a little sore for a day and I had a headache that night. Otherwise, no effects.
Excellent. And Reverend Lynn, you're feeling good?
Absolutely. Had no symptoms at all.
That's great.
You probably got the placebo.
I got the Moderna according to what I was told.
You got the Pfizer.
Placebo. I have a placebo. No, Tracy and I both, we had different stuff. But we're both vaccinated now, fully vaccinated.
Good. Did you guys have any symptoms?
Just the arm sore a little bit. I had the Moderna on Friday, and Saturday I had a little flu-y feeling, little bit. My neck was aching.
Mhm.
I didn't take anything, but I didn't take any Advil or Tylenol. They said it may be better not to unless you have to. That's what the pharmacist told me.
I heard.
But literally, by Sunday I was feeling good. So I definitely recommend it. I hope everybody has as minimal effects as I did, but definitely if you feel when you get that, that feeling of it's working and you feel the next day that, literally little thing off your shoulders, if you will. So
Right.
I think, look, we've got a long way to go still with getting everybody vaccinated, but I think we're starting to feel that things are good. And as we've discussed before, what Israel's proven is not only you can get vaccinated people, but that the vaccination is 99%. Not one person who's had the vaccine has died. So 4 people, I think,
Right.
were hospitalized, and it's probably the best understanding of what is happening. And again, we talked about the politicization of the vaccines. The issue is that in Israel, the Israelis, Christian, Arab, Muslim, have all had access to vaccinations. And the issue of what happens in West Bank, occupied territories, Judea and Samaria, whatever you want to call it. Yes, there's problems with getting those vaccinations in there, but that unfortunately is going to be more of a issue for the United Nations and the weird jurisdictions that go on in those places. So those are politicized areas. But there's other countries, by the way. I was reading. I mean, I think Japan only started their vaccinations like last week or the week before. Actually, I don't even know if they did it. They said mid-February, so I assume that they've done it. But there are other countries that are lagging behind for various reasons in the vaccination deal. So I don't know. I mean, I think some of it's politics, obviously, with some countries, and in other countries, it's just there's cultural issues and other things that make it make it difficult for people to wrap their heads around this for various reasons. I don't know. It's obviously until everyone in the world, kind of reaches, we all reach world, herd immunity, we're going to have problems, where there's going to be people that are going to get sick from this for years, and let's just hope they just don't get too sick. I hope. But
Mark, do you know if there's ever been any kind of resurgence of the Spanish flu from 100 years ago?
I've never heard that there was a major one, but I don't know. I don't know how long it took for it to, for the last people to get it. It's a good question. I don't know when the last people, who at least died of it. But yeah, I mean, that's our best
Harrison?
Has it mutated into something else with another name,
Spanish flu?
perhaps?
It could have.
Yeah.
It could have, stopped just calling it Spanish flu. But I do, there's people who are, I'm friendly with, who are in their 90s, et cetera, who have family members who died, or who had even siblings who died of Spanish flu.
Right.
My friend Margot, our friend Margot, she's named after somebody who had just died, a cousin, I think, who had just died of Spanish flu. She was born in like 1925, I think, 24, something like that, 23, 24, 25, somewhere in that range. And she was named after a cousin who had just died of Spanish flu. So
Wow.
Yeah, we still see the remnants, but again, it's hard to make, historical comparisons because of how much people travel now, about how much the economies are connected, how we shut down versus how they shut down. So that it's tough. By the way, I was thinking about that today too, in light of other stuff that's going on, how dangerous historical comparisons are, whether people are comparing things to Nazi era, which is always as you saw with Gina Carano, cost her a job. Then people making the comparison to Hollywood blacklisting. It's really tough when you make historical comparisons. It's really tough.
It's difficult not to.
It is. I do it all.
Difficult not to.
I do it all the time, but I'm also not a.
Basically, what we do as Jews.
Yeah, really.
We do that all the time. That's what
Over it and over it.
Yeah, but it is dangerous.
You have to learn from history, and other than comparing symptoms, if you will, or events, how else do you learn from history unless you go, oh, hey, that's kind of like.
But I think the combination of social media, the fact that celebrities have so many options for communicating, like, we didn't, you see the crazy things that John Wayne said, in off the cuff interviews, but he didn't tweet every day, right? I mean, who knows what would happen if he tweeted every day? But we have so much, and we have a 24-hour news cycle that it's really dangerous. And again, we all do it, but there is this weird thing. Because I thought about the Gina Carano thing, because I was going to write something about it. Here's a woman who made a kind of a dumb comparison, but a comparison that people make of what happens when people go after a minority. She compared Jews to conservatives, Jews in Germany to conservatives today. Then she was dropped from everybody. And then people, including, by the way, liberal Jews, Jonathan Chait wrote an article I read that was a pretty good one in the New Yorker, that said this is like blacklisting in communist days. This is like the McCarthy era, blacklisting, what's happening to her, and it shouldn't be allowed to happen. And I thought, well, that's not really true. I mean, it's bad, but there's not people informing on each. I mean, we're not there yet. I mean, let's be careful to compare that. And so I thought here's somebody who made a historical analogy now being compared as a victim in a historical analogy. And I'm like, maybe our best guess is our best options here are to be careful with what kinds of things we say. And we say we can learn from history, but they're not, the situations are not always exactly the same. They're not there. We have to be careful.
You mean use common sense and be calm and rational? Okay.
Yeah.
I understand that somewhere in the Talmud,
What an
it says,
idea.
your opinion is not the truth and does not have to be shared with everyone.
It's in the Talmud. I don't know.
I don't know. I got that.
Rosemary, I think you'd like that to be in the Talmud, but I'll search for that. That's a good one. I mean, there's a lot in the Talmud. It wouldn't surprise me if it was, but that seems like maybe a liberal translation of.
I don't know. It was the rabbi, the woman who used to be head of the URJ,
Uh-huh.
for Los Angeles.
Okay, that was one of her teachings. It could. I mean, listen, it could be. Honestly, I'll look that up because that's
Okay,
that's
I'd like to know if it's not there.
it could be again a very
Very liberal translation, maybe.
yeah, but it sounds like something.
But if you're a public person, people expect you to make comments and statements. I mean, whatever we say is of little import. But if you're a public person, it makes a huge difference. You have a sort of bully pulpit.
Yeah.
It may be your responsibility not to share your opinion about things in which you don't know more than the average person.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I have to go lie down now.
I do too.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that was interesting was this idea that somehow someone's politics. I mean, this was the argument that was made during the Hollywood blacklisting era, which was somehow this communist infiltration of media would affect, us, right? So that they would brainwash us with the movie messages that they would have would cause us to think and act differently. And that part of it, I mean, I don't know it was completely ludicrous. I mean, Dalton Trumbo definitely did movies that were about social action and justice, social justice. It's better to say than social action, social justice. But I wonder if many of us think that, Gina Carano, whose biggest role was playing a character, a warrior on a Star Wars spinoff, was really going to shape our discourse. So I mean, those kind of things, like when I think about it, sometimes I think it's kind of ludicrous, but I mean, I understand what the point was when media was shaped by so few people. And you can make the argument that the job of studios to some extent was to do, I wouldn't say propaganda, but I mean, these guys were hired during the war. The studios were hired during the war to do propaganda. I mean, that wasn't a secret. They were hired to do it. So I don't know. I'm not sure whether also today media, that kind of media or mainstream, commercial media even has that much power. And there's so much of it that you can, who knows? I think we pick and choose our media ourselves. We're so self-selective. We don't assume that Star Wars is going to brainwash us, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm naive to how powerful it is, but I don't know. I don't know that Gina Carano and Dalton Trumbo would carry the same weight media. But anyways, think about it. I mean, it's something to think about. It's not going away, folks. These issues we're talking about right now are not going to go away. But let's crack open our Midrash and turn back in time. We actually began a new volume last week of Ginsburg's writings, because he started this volume with leaving Egypt, and we left Egypt officially last week. Right now we're getting to the Sea of Reeds, so we're going to cross over. And so he started a new volume there, which is, it's always weird where you break a book, whether, it's the Torah, whether it's not so much the Talmud, because the Talmud was organized in sections to begin with. But when you break a narrative into another chapter, another book, it's always kind of, where do you do that? And Ginsburg definitely had it, there were volumes, some of it has to do with how big the book is. And by the way, don't think that that's not how the Torah got edited too. We don't like to think of it that way, but there's a reason why the Torah, the prophets, and the Ketuvim, the writings, are all the same, roughly the same size. The editors made decisions based on how much can fit on a scroll. And there are things that are not in the Bible simply because they were the word count was too long. And so there were decisions based on space. We don't like to think about that because, well, it's our holy canon, and we don't like to think about some editor 3,000, 2,500 years ago deciding what was going to be in the book, our holy book, but sometimes it had to be on the page. So Ginsburg started this section with that, and we will pop that up on the screen and get us up on the YouTube Facebook. So Rosemary, are you ready to read? Let me just get this. Make sure we're up there on Facebook. By the way, we're getting ready we have a lot going on for Purim this year. Tracy and I were talking about this. This is a lot. There's a lot here that we haven't done in the past, including this great escape room event that Tracy put together. And we also have our Megillah reading, our normal stuff. And this year, as some of you saw, we're doing a Purim Carnival virtually with the other congregations, just like we did a Purim Carnival last year. It was our last event live, by the way. This year we're doing a virtual one with the other synagogues. All the synagogues are doing a different piece. So it's pretty cool. One second, I'm not getting on Facebook, which is not the end of the world. Oh, here we go. One second, I have to do some login. All right.
When Pharaoh permitted Israel to depart, he was under the impression that they were going only a 3 days journey into the wilderness for the purpose of offering sacrifices. He sent officers with them whose duty was to bring them back at the appointed time. The exodus took place on a Thursday. On the following Sunday, the king's watchers noticed that the Israelites, so far from preparing for a return, were making arrangements looking to a long sojourn in the desert. They remonstrated and urged them to go back. The Israelites maintained that Pharaoh had dismissed them for good, but the officers would not be put off with their mere assertions. They said, willy-nilly, you will have to do as the powers that be command. To such arrogance the Israelites would not submit, and they fell upon the officers, slaying some and wounding others. The maimed survivors went back to Egypt and report the contumacy of the Israelites to Pharaoh. Meantime, Moses, who did not desire the departure of his people to have the appearance of flight before the Egyptians, gave the signal to turn back to Pi Hahirot. Those of little faith among the Israelites tore their hair and their garments in desperation, though Moses assured them that by the word of God they were free men and no longer slaves to Pharaoh. Accordingly, they retraced their steps to Pi Hahirot, where 2 rectangular rocks form an opening, within which the great sanctuary of Baal Zephon was situated. The rocks are shaped like human figures, the one a man and the other a woman, and they were not chiseled by human hands, but by the Creator himself. The place had been called Pitom in earlier years, but later, on account of the idols set up there, it received the name Hahirot. Of set purpose, God had left Baal Zephon uninjured, alone of all the Egyptian idols. He wanted the Egyptian people to think that this idol was possessed of exceeding might, which it exercised to prevent the Israelites from journeying on. To confirm them in their illusory belief, God caused wild beasts to obstruct the road to the wilderness, and they took it for granted that their idol, Baal Zephon, had ordained their appearance.
Wow. This is a weird story because none of this is in the Bible. None of it. other than the people stopped at these places. Piha, he wrote. And the place that they stopped is also then, the next place is called Baal Tzafon, which is the place right by, these are or they were real locations. It's clear that the writer of the Midrash didn't exactly know what these places were or what gods they were attached to. Because Baal Tzafon was a god, not a real god. It was a god that really people worship. I don't want to say it was a real god, but Baal Tzafon was a god of the mountains, a god of the northern mountains. So either like really high up mountain in Turkey or Syria, or maybe a high mountain in north of Israel and Lebanon. The point about where Tzafon is, it actually doesn't really matter, because in Hebrew, it means the north. Actually, the word Tzafon in modern Hebrew is the word for north. But Baal Tzafon is the god of the mountain, or god of the northern mountain. And it was definitely a god. Everybody knows that anytime you see the name Baal, it's a god. But here, there's going to be this weird standoff between God and the idols for a final showdown. And so all the other idols we read, and if you weren't here in the previous Midrash discussions, we read that God actually causes the Egyptian idols to melt. It's one of the things that also the Bible doesn't say, but it's a way for God just to make the Egyptians feel even stupid, more ineffective and distraught, is that their idols literally melt, and they're left with nothing. Which, by the way, if you watch the movie The Prince of Egypt, actually happens. The idols turn to dust, which is really interesting, because it's what the Midrash says happens. So one of them spared, this idol that's at the Red Sea, and it's, according to this, it's like a miraculous idol. It's not a normal idol. It's an idol like that really is, I don't want to say mythological, but that's not the right word. It really has, there really is some type of power to it, according to this. You're going to see some stuff in this, by the way, that seems to indicate that not that there are other gods. I want to be really careful with that, but that other nations have powers. And the way it's described, we've kind of seen it before in the discussions of Edom and some of the other groups of people that are mentioned in the Torah. The rabbis believed, or during the rabbinic period, or before the rabbinic period, that there are angels that represent all the nations. And so the other nations also have power. They have protection, if you will. It's not through God, in the sense that God won't fight for them as God's fighting for us, but God has designated angels. So it still comes from God, but they have an advocating angel and defending angel, and angel that goes to bat for them and goes to war for them even. You're going to see that today. Today, maybe, I think probably more than ever, you're going to see this collection of midrashim and mythology, if you will. So it's very interesting, because it explains how nations rise and fall to some extent. It's kind of like a theology of power, but it also allows for, I don't want to say, a kind of a weak form of polytheism. It's a weak form of, yeah, well, maybe these things work a little bit, but only because God lets them work, and only because God has these nations have these kinds of weird things. Again, it's not in the Torah, but there are things in the Torah that kind of open up the fact that maybe there are other powers. They're just not our power, and they're not something that we should ever think about and deal with. I mean, that would be the takeaway. I mean, if you think about it, and I don't want to dwell on it because it's not the time and place to dwell on it. We actually read it in the Torah a couple weeks ago in the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments specifically says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. You shall have no other gods besides me. It doesn't say there are no other gods. And so some people have speculated that the Ten Commandments reflects a time in Jewish belief where Jews were monotheistic, but more kenotheistic in that they believed in one God that was their God, but not that other people didn't have gods. So there is that belief that monotheism didn't, the idea that there was one God that was the God of everything took time to develop. That originally there was a stage in Jewish theology, Israelite theology, that God was our God and you weren't supposed to have any other gods, which is different than there's no other God. Again, by the time of the rabbis, that's not going to fly. And you could have these remnants of there's other angels that defend these. But I do think it reflects this tendency that people had to say, well, yeah, other people have power too. Just look around. They clearly, the Romans must have really good powers behind them because they're doing really well. So just keep that in mind. There are remnants of that here. And again, how did the rabbis even hang this on? Well, again, this idea that when the Israelites left, they're powerful, but they're not fully powerful. That's not going to happen until after the Sea of Reeds. So the Sea of Reeds has got to be big. And they actually based it on this idea that the Egyptians really don't know for sure whether the Jews are coming back or not. That's what it said. That at this point, the Egyptians have actually sent with them managers, if you will, to make sure they do come back. It's interesting. Did the Jews think they were coming back? Did some of the Jews think they were coming back? That they were only going away for 3 days? I mean, the whole thing, some people seem to have known that they were not coming back. But there was that original thing that Moses said to Pharaoh, which is, let us go 3 days to worship our God. So this kind of comes back on that idea in the Midrash. All right, so other things that we know about this place.
Pihahirot was famous, besides, on account of the treasures heaped up there. The wealth of the world, which Joseph had acquired through the sale of corn, he had stored up during the 7 years of plenty. He had divided into 3 parts. The first part he surrendered to Pharaoh. The second part he concealed in the wilderness, where it was found by Korah, though it disappeared again, not to come to view until the Messianic time, and then it will be for the benefit of the pious. The third part Joseph hid in the sanctuary of Baal Zephon, whence the Hebrews carried it off as booty.
Okay, that's really weird.
Mm-hmm.
So there's treasure here at this place, and Joseph hid a third of the wealth of the world at the time, because remember, the world leveraged everything they had. They gave all their money to Pharaoh during the time of the famine because that was the only place they could get food. So they literally amassed this great wealth. Well, Pharaoh only got a third of it. A third of it's here in this place, and the Israelites are going to get that money too. So not only did they get the money from the Egyptians when they left, they got money here at this place. Wow. So it was like Joseph knew to put some aside, and essentially, again, here we go. You're going to get some of it. You get it now. The weird thing, of course, is that a third of it was with Korah, and when Korah got swallowed up, that money got swallowed up too. Now, where does this even come from? I mean, this comes from, these ideas that there's money hidden in places, and obviously, if you're good, you're going to get some of it in the world to come, which, by the way, number one, of course, implies that you need money in the world to come.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Money doesn't go away. Death and illness and war, those all go away. But money doesn't go away, which is interesting because, again, what you're reading is this idea that we had in Judaism that the Messianic era isn't wholly different from, it's not like there's a whole different situation of life. It's just a time of peace and a time where you don't have to worry about where your next meal's coming from, and a time when Jews get to return to their land and get power back. It's not wholly different from like a really, really good life on earth, because it's still life on earth. So it's very different from this idea that, again, this early version of the Messianic era, which is not, we all go to heaven and we get raptured up and everyone dies and we're all angels. And that's not what the Messianic era is, at least at some point in Jewish understanding, which, by the way, never goes away. Which is why when some people in our community talk about the Messianic era and the Messiah, they're not talking about a time that's that different than what we have right now. Which is why when Chabad people talk about the Messianic era, they're talking about like now. And when they talk about, we want Moshiach now, the Messiah to come, they're basically just saying they want their Rebbe to lead them. But they see, and see, honestly, they will tell you, many people in Chabad, that because once Israel was reestablished, that this was the first steps towards our Messianic era. And not ours, but the world's, but their vision of it. And so this doesn't really go away. This idea that the Messianic era might be upon us right now is very important within segments of Judaism right now, who really see us really, really close. So, I mean, some of us walk around going, are you kidding me? We're so far away. But there are elements in our community that think we're not that far away. And I would say there's elements in Israel of religious Zionists, not necessarily Chabad, but religious Zionists, who also believe that we really have entered that phase, that if we're not there yet, we've entered into it. We're in it. And so that's why there's a very different, like if you got in a discussion with somebody who tells you we're actually in the Messianic age now, or the beginning of the Messianic age, you'd say, what are you talking about? I never heard that. And you may not believe that, but there are people who believe it 100%. And I think within Reform Judaism, there's an idea that the Messianic era is possible, and that we're also not that far away from it. I think that there's actually some unity in that kind of idea that, if we take a few proactive, positive steps, that maybe we're not that far away. So I don't know that there's a huge chasm between some Reform Jewish thinkers and Orthodox on that. The Reform movement tends to be pretty specific that it's an era and not a person, but those are actually points of greater convergence. So we get this treasure then, and we'll get to Korach, in the story of Korach, and he got swallowed up, but the treasure got swallowed up too. By the way, all this is predicated on the fact that in the ancient world, and not so well talking about until about banks, the advent of banks 200, 300 years ago, treasure hoards were pretty common. They're not that, it's not that unbelievable that someone would have buried a bunch of money and that the treasure is waiting there to be found. Now, a lot of those treasures have been found because people tend to live in the same areas that they've always lived in. And occasionally someone would dig in their backyard and find a treasure hoard. By the way, go watch The Dig on Netflix. Not bad. It's not great. It's not bad, though. It's a good distraction. It's about Sutton Hoo and the amazing find Viking hoard that was found, or not Viking, but Anglo-Saxon hoard that was found in England right on the verge of World War II. So it's Ralph Fiennes stars in it. For people who are enamored with archaeology, it's definitely in British history, by the way. It's a great show. Those are a little different because those were burial mounds, but people also found hoards. We found an amazing hoard, and I say we by the world, but we found an amazing hoard about 20 years ago in Germany. in Erfurt in north central Germany. Erfurt had a huge Jewish community during the Middle Ages. We found a huge treasure trove. I've seen it. It's actually on display at the museum in Erfurt, and just by the way, is unfortunately only about 15 miles away from a horrible place, Buchenwald, one of the horrible camps, concentration camps that was in Germany. So not far from Buchenwald is Erfurt, and they found a hoard of a Jewish merchant, kind of like figured out a little bit about this person, and he buried his treasure, probably thinking he was going to come back. It was during the Black Plague, and maybe the whole family died, or we really don't know what happened. But they found it 20 years ago, and it was beautiful, beautiful. Jewelry was found, beautiful gold, gold sewn, embroidered kind of jewels in fabric, and money and actual coins. And so it was interesting because you could see what coins they were using at the time. But it was found in a house. They were doing some work on it, and they knocked over a doorway and found this amazing trove, and it was not clearly a burial. It was somebody's hidden treasure. And so people would bury stuff for various reasons, thinking they'd come back, protecting during a time of death in those days, a time where people had to flee a community because of plague. And people died, maybe they were killed in war and never had a chance to, and so no one knew where the money was. So it happened. I mean, this is based on fact, based on reality. So who knows? We're not going to find treasure. Very unlikely you're going to find it in Valencia or even Santa Paula. But if you live in parts of Europe, parts of the Middle East too, you can occasionally find a hoard of treasure that was meant to be safe. It was there for safekeeping, not for burial. So these things are real. And they wrote about what they knew, which was people hiding money. Who gets to find that money, by the way? People who buried it. And sometimes it's for people who deserve it, at least according to Midrash. So hopefully you're deserving of finding your buried treasure one day. I find this stuff to be amazing because not that I ever think I'm going to find a treasure, but it's amazing to think that people, buried with the hope that, again, that there'll be a time when they could enjoy it, or their descendants could enjoy it. And I guess you could say we're their descendants too. There's treasures all over the place. Obviously, it's not always monetary. All right, more about the escape.
When Amalek and the magicians brought the information to Pharaoh that the Israelites had resolved not to return to Egypt, his heart and the heart of his whole people turned against them. The very counselors that had persuaded him to dismiss the children of Israel spoke now as follows: "If we had only been smitten with the plagues, we could have resigned ourselves to our fate. Or if, besides being smitten with the plagues, we had been compelled to let the Hebrews depart from the land, that too we could have borne with patience. But to be smitten with the plagues, to be compelled to let our slaves depart from us, and to sit by and see them go off with our riches, that is more than we can endure."
Yeah, so they're saying it's all these things. All these things are happening to us. We had the plagues, they're not coming back, and they took all our money. Well, by the way, what did they think they were going to do with that money? Were they really did they really think that they were coming back with the money? It does say they lent it to them. So was this a little bit of a way to let them leave surreptitiously? Look, the Midrash presents it that maybe it was. Maybe the escape as, hey, we're leaving here as free people, but we're coming back. And maybe that they still needed that. I don't know. I mean, it's a weird thing to go down, but the Midrash goes down that road. And so the Egyptians now are all having second thoughts, not just Pharaoh. So here's what happens, what the Egyptians are, what's going on in their minds.
Now that the children of Israel had gone from them, the Egyptians recognized how valuable an element they had been in their country. In general, the time of the exodus of Israel was disastrous for their former masters. In addition to losing their dominion over the Israelites, the Egyptians had to deal with mutinies that broke out among many other nations tributary to them, for hitherto Pharaoh had been the ruler of the whole world. The king resorted to blandishments and promises to induce the people to make war against the Israelites, saying, as a rule, the army marches forth first and the king follows in security. But I will precede you, and as a rule, the king has the first choice of the booty and as much of it as he desires. But I will take no more than any one of you. And on my return from the war, I will divide my treasures of silver, gold, and precious stones among you.
Uh-huh. And
In his zeal, Pharaoh did.
Wait, hold it. So everybody, no, I said everybody gets what's happening here now, which is Pharaoh is
Pandering to his base.
I just love the fact that Pharaoh, who we thought was the problem, now is like, oh, well, if that's what you want to do, then I'm going to get right on it. Yeah, it was kind of funny. So that's part of I don't want to say letting Pharaoh off the hook, because he's not let off the hook, but it's now implicating everybody else. I will tell you, there was a reason why Amalek was mentioned there, that somehow, again, Amalek was involved in getting people riled up. The Amalekites, we never read about them in Egypt, but we are going to read about them in the same Torah portion. And so just keep that in mind, that Amalek is somehow part of this, is looped into this in the Midrash. Amalek, again, is very critical in this Torah portion, because Bishalach, the story of leaving Egypt, crossing the Sea of Reeds, finishes with the story of this battle with Amalek. So the rabbis brought them into the beginning of the story, if you will, too, or the beginning of the Exodus chapter, if you will. All right. So that's why Amalek was mentioned there too, in this context too. Okay.
In his zeal, Pharaoh did not wait to have his chariot made ready for him. He did it with his own hands, and his nobles followed his example. Samael granted Pharaoh assistance, putting 600 chariots manned with his own hosts at his disposal. These formed the vanguard, and they were joined by all the Egyptians with their vast assemblages of chariots and warriors, no less than 300 of their men to one of the children of Israel, each equipped with their different sorts of weapons. The general custom was for 2 charioteers to take turns at driving a car, but to overtake the Israelites more surely and speedily, Pharaoh ordered 3 to be assigned to each. The result was that they covered in one day the ground which it had taken the Israelites 3 to traverse.
Yes. So he put an extra, he got extra horsepower, if you will, right? Literally. So that's more horsepower. We're going to put a new engine in that car. So
This is written by somebody who doesn't know much about horses.
yes, but we still actually talk about horsepower, right? We
yes,
actually,
but the idea that the chariot will go further if it has more drivers, but you have the same horse, the horse is still going to get tired.
correct. And so, but it is spread apart. It does, obviously, the energy is used by more. Yes, it is this idea that that chariots work kind of like horses do in the fields, where if you add another, or a 20 mule or whatever, 40 mule, the 40 mule, whatever, borax thing. But the reality is that Pharaoh goes into high gear. And very importantly, what I wanted to point out is that we're getting this angel business. We got Samael. And Samael got dropped in. And for those who are not familiar or forgot who Samael is, he is another name for Satan. Every time I say that, I want to say, is it Satan? It's not. It's that guy. He's the angel that we don't like. He's sometimes the angel of death. He's the angel of destruction. He's the angel of our enemies. In this case, he's an angel that's going to help Pharaoh. So this is what I'm talking about when I say the Midrash starts to get into some very interesting mythologies of help from above that other people get, not Jews, our enemies, that they sometimes get help from above, which means that there's a process in play. This is the theological underpinnings for this. When bad things happen to us as a people, maybe sometimes individually too, but really we don't get into that too much. But when bad things happen to Israel as a group, one of the explanations that we can have for it is that those people's angels are in ascension and have gotten power, and that God has allowed those angels a chance to do stuff, including sometimes to go after us. So, to use the historical analogies that we talked about at the beginning that we're not supposed to use, but people use them. And so I do want to tell you that when people even try to explain the Holocaust, they will talk about the angel of death, or this guy in particular, Samael, having power and giving power to the Nazis during the war. And they literally will ascribe the same types of power to modern day opponents. So if they're doing well, it's because their angel is giving them extra strength. So it hasn't gone away completely, folks. Because again, they'll take this Midrash literally. They don't see this as a story. They see this as an explanation for why things happen. All right. And including today.
The mind of the Egyptians was in no wise directed towards spoil and plunder in this expedition. Their sole and determined purpose was to exterminate Israel, kith and kin. As the heathen lay great stress upon omens when they are about to start out on a campaign, God caused all their preparations to proceed smoothly, without the slightest untoward circumstance. Everything pointed to a happy issue. Pharaoh, himself an adept in magic, had a presentiment that dire misfortune would befall the children of Israel in the wilderness, that they would lose Moses there, and there the whole generation that had departed from Egypt would find its grave. Therefore he spoke to Datan and Abiram, who remained behind in Egypt, saying, Moses is leading them, but he himself knows not where. Verily, the congregation of Israel will lift up their voice in the wilderness and cry, and there they will be destroyed. He thought, naturally, that these visions had reference to an imminent future, to the time of his meeting with his dismissed slaves. But his error was profound. He was hurrying forward to his own destruction.
Yep. And so here's the rabbis trying to explain how Pharaoh could have been so stupid. Yeah, he's not really stupid. He actually has powers. He's a sorcerer. We've read that before too, by the way. We read even that his wife has powers. And so he just gets a message and he doesn't know how to process it. He sees death for the Israelites. He just thinks he's the one who's doing it. And he gets a message which the Israelites are going to get a message about. not until, of course, after they give up on themselves and after the time of the spies. But this kind of, and again, they're that generation being told they're never going to enter the land and that they're going to die in the wilderness. You know, this is something that you know, Pharaoh was able to get that vision of. He just thought, again, it was him. And again, to some extent, the rabbis are trying to understand, how could Pharaoh be so stupid? Like this is stupid. You just barely escaped with your life, and now you're going to go after us? Like, that's crazy. Even for a guy whose heart's been hardened, this is nuts. And so they kind of explain it by saying Pharaoh just messed up his vision. Got, you know, he got the wrong message, or he misinterpreted a message, a vision. And again, this is all based too on the idea that the rabbis really believed that when God said and punished us by saying we're all going to die in the wilderness, that was literally like, you're going to die in the wilderness. And it's not like you just died of old age. You died in the wilderness because of this. And if you recall, the Midrash says that every year on this date, the Israelites would literally dig graves for themselves. Every man would lie down in a grave. And every year for roughly 40 years, 38 years, 1/38 of them never got up out of that grave. I mean, they interpreted it very literally, that people didn't just die of old age as they were in the wilderness. Every year on that date of that anniversary, they would lay down on their pre-dug graves, and 1/38 of them didn't get up. That's a pretty wild imaginary nightmare of punishment. But that's why, you know, essentially Pharaoh dreams all these graves, right? And he goes, I did that. So that's why he blundered, because he had information, he just didn't process it right, which tells you sometimes that having the wrong information or not knowing what to do with the information can be worse than having, you know, no information. So he ends up making a really bad decision. All right, here's what happens.
When the Israelites beheld when he reached the sanctuary of Baal-zephon, Pharaoh, in his joy at finding him spared while all the other idols in Egypt had been annihilated, lost no time but hastened to offer sacrifices to him, and he was comforted. For, he said, Baal-zephon approves my purpose of drowning the children of Israel in the sea. When the Israelites beheld the huge detachments of the Egyptian army moving upon them, and when they considered that in Migdol there were other troops stationed besides, more indeed than their own numbers, men, women, and children all told, great terror overwhelmed them. What affrighted them most was the sight of the angel of Egypt darting through the air as he flew to the assistance of the people under his tutelage. They turned to Moses, saying, "What have you done to us? Now they will requite us for all that has happened, that their firstborn were smitten, and that we ran off with their money, which was your fault. For you did bid us borrow gold and silver from our Egyptian neighbors and depart with their property."
Well, we know that happened, or the Torah tells us this scene happened. The Israelites freaked out. They flipped out. They said, "Moses, you took us here to kill us. How could you weren't there graves?" That's the famous line. "Weren't there graves back in Egypt that you took us out here to kill us? To kill us? You did this." Like, you know, the people did do this. They did go crazy. And God, by the way, did this too, because God lets the Egyptians come into sight before he opens or has the sea open for them, right? It's actually more dramatic than that. So the rabbis are simply building on what the Torah actually does say. which is that the Egyptians are coming in, the Israelites see them with the chariots. They have no idea how they're going to, I mean, they have no idea how they're going to escape. I mean, it's literally, I mean, one could understand why they're panicking. I mean, it's not far-fetched to understand that this caused a lot of fear. Now, we also know that right in front of them is the angel of God in a pillar of cloud or a pillar of fire, which means that God's never left them. This whole entire few days that they've journeyed, they've never not been in the sight of God. God's been with them the whole time. But yet they're wondering, like, is this a setup? Did God literally take us out here to kill us? What kind of weird thing is happening here? And of course they blame Moses, which is what they always do. Like, well, that's who they're gonna attack. So all that is in the Torah, all that, except the part where you made us even worse made it worse by taking their money. We took their money too, Moses. You told us to take their money. That's not quite in the Torah, but it embellishes or adds to the fact. I mean, it's all the facts, and it basically just enhances it. It reminds us of all these things. I will like to remind you, though, again, God hasn't left them. There is that. You could make the argument they could have looked up and seen God in the pillar of fire and cloud in front of them for those days, but okay.
The situation of the Israelites was desperate. Before them was the sea, behind them the Egyptians, on both sides the wild beasts of the desert. The wicked among them spoke to Moses, saying, "While we were in Egypt, we said to you and to Aaron, 'The Lord look upon you and judge, because you have made our savor to be abhorred in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of his servants, to put a sword in their hand to slay us.' Then there died many of our brethren during the days of darkness, which was worse than the bondage in which the Egyptians kept us. Nevertheless, our fate in the desert will be sadder than theirs. They at least were mourned, and their bodies are buried, but our corpses will lie exposed, consumed in the day by drought and by frost in the night."
That's pretty wild. So again, it goes back to that Midrash we read, that there were a lot of Jews that died in the days of darkness. That the darkness allowed Jews who were not good people to die and for it not to be seen, right? And so we shouldn't have known how many Jews died. There were lots of them. There were lots of wicked Jews that died on the day of darkness. And so the Midrash preserves that teaching, but also this idea that what really is freaking out some of these still not so good people, because if those are the bad ones that died, these are the ones that weren't quite as bad, but they're still kind of, some of these people are, as we know, are kind of a little iffy, because now they're saying to Moses, those wicked people that died back then, at least they got buried. We're not going to get buried. We're going to die, and we're left to expose. Our bodies are going to rot out here, which, by the way, let's just sit with that for a second, because what that tells us is that one of the fears that we have as Jews is that our bodies are going to not be buried, that our bodies are going to lay out in the open. And that is not everybody's fear. That's a fear that we have. I want to say we all have that fear, or we all have that fear today. But this idea that a body would be laid out in the open, exposed, decomposing, disrespected, is very upsetting for us as Jews, which is why crucifixion and Roman era punishments were so disgusting for us. Even later ideas of, piking someone or having some body hang in a, cage over a city or something. Those kinds of things really, really went against the Jewish ideas of burial and giving respect to even our enemies when they die, not to expose bodies. There's a horrible story in the Bible about King Saul and his family's bodies being exposed during the wars against the Philistines, and that his own family members, other extended family, snuck into Gibeah and took the bodies back because they were being exposed, and that Saul's bodies was disrespected after he was killed. That story is an interesting one. And it is look, by our standards today, these things kind of, we read them and are like, what are they talking about? This is craziness. It's because in American culture and most Western societies today, that leaving bodies out is considered to be offensive. It wasn't always like that. We also, even before there was an issue of illness and spread of illness. I mean, look, those values are now pretty prevalent, the values we have, but we've also got into a mindset that bodies decaying are a health risk, which they are. Probably less of a health risk than we are freaked out by, but most of us, we're freaked out by that too. It's a very different world we live in than our ancestors did, who would encounter dead bodies probably far more frequently than we even would like to imagine for a second. There were probably dead bodies during the Roman era way too frequently, all around the place, all over. Sometimes by intention, and sometimes by just neglect. So it's a Jewish fear. It's a Jewish fear that corpse defilement in our set has been going on for thousands of years, and it existed for our ancestors too. And by the way, it's not ancient history, because it's one of the things that is a nightmare for Israelis. Israeli soldiers are very, very upset to know that if they get killed in combat, that their bodies are going to be dragged through streets in complete ridicule and in humiliation. And it happens, and it's happened, and it happened in the last 10 years. And so Israeli soldiers will sometimes risk their lives to bring their comrades' bodies back, rather than have them be able to be left out in the open. It's a horrible thing to think about, and I don't like to think about it or mention it, other than this is real stuff. And it still happens. It still happens. So, what can I tell you? It is, for those, by the way, who saw another Netflix show about Ellie Cohen, The Spy, which was very well done. I mean, Sacha Baron Cohen did an amazing job playing Ellie Cohen in a very serious role. It was not a comedy at all. Ellie Cohen's body was on display in Syria after he was found and executed. They hung his body for days. I think it was days. His body hung in a square in Damascus. So this is not ancient history, and it is not left our consciousness, to put it mildly. It's our value, it's one of our values, I guess. Even in battle, our enemies are not supposed to have their corpses defiled. Again, just, this is what you're reading and the psychology of what you're reading, why we're reading it. All right, let's get back to the drama, the excitement.
Moses, in his wisdom, knew how to pacify the thousands and myriads under his leadership. he impressed them with the words, "Fear you not, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord." "When will his salvation come?" questioned the people. And he told them it would appear the following day. But they protested, "We cannot wait until tomorrow." Then Moses prayed to God, and the Lord showed him the angel hosts standing ready to hasten to the assistance of the people.
Yep. This is the angelic battle. And the people are told by Moses, just wait. It's going to happen. Just wait a day. It's happening. But they see the chariots and they're like, no, we can't wait. What are you kidding me? Got to do it now. And Moses gets to see what this looks like. He gets to see what's about to happen, tomorrow. The people don't get to see it, but he has to go back to the people and say, just have patience. Not easy. It's not easy to tell the masses, just wait a day. It's going to be great. Wait till you see this battle.
They were not agreed as to what they were to do. There were 4 contending parties. The opinion of the first party was that they seek death by drowning in the sea. Of the second, that they return to Egypt. The third was in favor of a pitched battle with the enemy, and the fourth thought it would be a good plan to intimidate the Egyptians by noise and a great hubbub. To the first, Moses said, "Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord." To the second, "The Egyptians whom you have seen today, you shall see them again no more forever." To the third, "The Lord will fight for you." And to the fourth, "You shall hold your peace." "What then shall we do?" these asked their leader, and Moses answered them, saying, "You shall bless, praise, extol, adore, and glorify him that is the Lord of war." Instead of the sword and the 5 sorts of arms which they bore, they made use of their mouth, and it was of greater avail than all possible weapons of war. The Lord hearkened unto their prayer, for which he had been but waiting.
Right. So all they have to do is one thing. They have to pray. Praying is going to be the answer for what they really need to do. But of course, we see there were differences of opinion on what to do. Some people wanted to fight. Some people wanted to commit mass suicide. Some people just figured if they can figure out a way to get just to scare the Egyptians. People are trying to come up with solutions, but they can't really come up with an answer. There is no answer for this other than to pray. And so Moses tells them, just have faith, and to pray. Now, where does this even come from? This comes from reality. This comes from the fact that Jews, especially during the time of the Romans, they didn't know for sure what to do. There were some people who said, we got to fight the Romans. Others that said, well, it's probably better for us to just give up. Other people said, you know what? Mass suicide is the only way to go. We know, of course, about Masada, because there was almost 1,000 Jews that committed suicide there, but that was during battle. There also were times when Jews seemed to also opt out of fighting altogether and just commit suicide. And there's the famous scene up in the Galilee at Magdala where, up in that area, and Magdala and Gamla and a couple other places up in the Galil, which was, by the way, the hotbed of resistance. The area that Jesus lived in was really the hotbed of resistance to the Romans for a period, because again, Jerusalem was where the Romans were garrisoned and it was the capital. But the Galilee seemed to really have this independence streak, if you will, which is why Jesus preaching there was interesting, because it might have been a little bit too pacifistic for some Jews in that Galilee region. But At Gamla alone, according to Josephus, the same guy who told us about Masada, which turned out to be true, we didn't believe it until we excavated it and found out that much of what Josephus said seemed to be true. According to him, 5,000 people committed suicide at Gamla alone. 5,000. It's 5 times more than at Masada. And it seems to have been a little bit more of a mass suicide than, well, we can either die in battle or we can die by our own hand. 5,000 people is a lot of people. Even by today's standards, that's a horrific occurrence. So this didn't come from nowhere. That's all I want to tell you. This idea that it's better for us to just throw ourselves into the water wasn't far-fetched. And there's a lot of stories in the Talmud, contemporary stories of Jews committing suicide rather than becoming Roman slaves or victims of Rome, that they would rather commit suicide. It's a story of a boatload of Jewish boys and girls and teenagers that are being sent to Rome, according to their testimony, to become sex slaves in Rome. And they threw themselves overboard rather than go to Rome. So these stories were not like fanciful legends of, people who didn't know what this was. These people were not speaking speculatively. They were speaking from real life. So remember that that's part of the scene here, that the water is in front of them. Are they going to cross it, or are they going to die in it by their own hand? All right.
Moses also addressed himself to God, saying, O Lord of the world, I am like the shepherd who, having undertaken to pasture a flock, has been heedless enough to drive his sheep to the edge of a precipice, and then is in despair how to get them down again. Pharaoh is behind my flock, Israel. In the south is Baal-zephon, in the north Migdol, and before us the sea lies spread out. You know, O Lord, that it is beyond human strength and human contrivance to surmount the difficulties standing in our way. Yours alone is the work of procuring deliverance for this army, which left Egypt at your appointment. We despair of all other assistance or device, and we have recourse only to our hope in you. If there is any escape possible, we look up to your providence to accomplish it for us. With such words, Moses continued to make fervent supplication to God to succor Israel in their need, but God cut short his prayer, saying, Moses, my children are in distress. The sea blocks the way before them. The enemy is in hot pursuit after them. And you stand here and pray. Sometimes long prayer is good, but sometimes it is better to be brief. If I gathered the waters together in one place and let the dry land appear for Adam, a single human being, should I not do the same for this holy congregation? I will save them, if only for the sake of the merits of Abraham, who stood ready to sacrifice his son Isaac to me, and for the sake of my promise to Jacob. The sun and the moon are witnesses that I will cleave the sea for the seed of the children of Israel, who deserve my help for going after me in the wilderness unquestioningly. Do you but see to it that they abandon their evil thought of returning to Egypt, and then it will not be necessary to turn to me and entreat my help.
Right. So here,
Quit praying already.
the rabbis do something very interesting here, which is they tell Moses, you've prayed enough. Don't stop the praying. Now's the time to actually do something, and understand something too. The only reason why this is happening is because these people now have given up. They wanted to go back to Egypt. They now said they want to go back to Egypt. If they just could get out of that mindset, I know that they have it within them. Look, they followed me into the wilderness. They took those steps and made it there, made it here. But they've got to give up this idea that they can go back. There's no going back. And they don't get that yet. And of course, they don't get it they're still saying the same thing, and the rabbis know this. They're still saying the same thing years later. We should have gone back. Never should have left Egypt. So this is a problem of the Israelite mentality of, but we can always go back. And I will tell you, there is an issue here in the whole Bible, because the editors of the Bible set it up like this. And we miss it because we don't understand history and we don't understand what really happened. But one of the things that happened to probably some of the most important editors of the Bible, when we talk about editors of the Bible, we're talking about who wrote the Bible, but also who edited the Bible. We know that Ezra the scribe edited a good, maybe most of what we have as the Bible. Ezra did it when we came back from Babylonia in 440. But about 100 years before that, when we went into exile from Jerusalem, the people that led us out of, well, we went in two directions, folks. A good chunk of the Israelite Judean leadership went to Babylonia. The kings, their family, Ezra's family, those prophets and priests and leaders went, for the most part, to Babylonia. But there was a good chunk of prophets, priests, and leaders that went to Egypt. And one of those guys was Jeremiah and his scribe, Baruch. And Baruch was probably the editor of the Torah. Maybe not the whole Bible, but a good chunk of the Torah. And Baruch, who we learn a little bit about, edits the Bible. And here we have this work that he's doing for Jeremiah and codifying his prophecies and also his writings and maybe the book of Lamentations. And what's so crazy is that Jeremiah and his crew go down to Egypt. And Jeremiah goes down to Egypt kicking and screaming. And what we know from Jeremiah is that Jeremiah says, you never go back to Egypt. You never go back. Now, how important was that in the editing of the Bible, or at least, again, the Torah, that one of the main editors, and if, again, not writers, but editors of the Bible, has a message, which is you never go back to Egypt. Maybe we see this in the text as clues throughout the text that whenever the Israelites say, we're going to go to Egypt, we're going to go back to Egypt, we're going to go back to Egypt, that there's some voice there going, you don't go back to Egypt. And you don't go back to Egypt because you never abandon the land. You never abandon the dream. You never go away from what God is telling you to do. And there seems to be this idea that Jeremiah never wants to leave Israel. He's like the Israelite. He's like Moses, who's the good person who says, no, God told us not to abandon the place. Don't go to Egypt. And so this wasn't just Israelites during the time of Moses saying, let's go to Egypt. Let's go back to Egypt. Egypt is our home. In Jeremiah's time, they were saying it too. And ironically, Jeremiah, from what we know, dies in Egypt. And he goes there kicking and screaming. He goes there only when his own people say, Jeremiah, there's nowhere else to go. You either go to Babylonia or you go to Egypt. You can't stay in Israel anymore. You have to leave. It's done. You will get killed if you stay there. And they literally forced him out. They literally, according to Jeremiah's own story, they took him by force, his people took him by force to Egypt. He didn't want to go. And if you remember about Jeremiah, he buys land in the land of Israel as it's falling apart. He claims this property in Anatot because he doesn't want to leave. And so that might be also why the Torah over and over again gives us this message of not going back to Egypt. It wasn't just during Moses' time. It was hundreds of years later. Going to Egypt is a failure. Going to Egypt is an admission of we've given up in a big way, in a major way. That's going backwards. And we still say that. Don't go backwards. Going to Egypt is going backwards, giving up. All right. Good.
Moses, however, was still very much troubled in mind on account of Samuel, who had not left off lodging accusations before God against Israel since the exodus from Egypt. The Lord adopted the same procedure in dealing with the accuser as the experienced shepherd who, at the moment of transferring his sheep across a stream, was faced by a ravening wolf. The shepherd threw a strong ram to the wolf, and while the two engaged in combat, the rest of the flock was carried across the water. And then the shepherd returned and snatched the wolf's supposed prey away from him. Samael said to the Lord, up to this time, the children of Israel were idol worshippers. And now you propose so great a thing as dividing the sea for them. What did the Lord do? He surrendered Job to Samael, saying, while he busies himself with Job, Israel will pass through the sea unscathed. And as soon as they are in safety, I will rescue Job from the hands of Samael.
Well, that's interesting, because we just read why Job got punished or goes through this problem with again, not deserving punishment, but God used Job as a distraction for Samael. So Samael is an angel. He's only doing what he does because God's programmed him to do that. So Samael goes after people and brings out the worst in them and uses that for their destruction. So Samael isn't evil as much as he is programmed to bring out and to let God know all the worst that you've done. So when the Israelites are at the Sea of Reeds, Samael is saying to them, these people don't deserve this miracle. Now, that's different than saying, let's kill these people, or it's different than just being a problem to people for no reason. There's a reason they don't deserve it. Now, God doesn't want to hear that. God wants to help us, but he has to listen to Samael. Samael is only speaking the truth. So this is I hate to say it, but this is the Lucifer of Lucifer. This is the Lucifer of our television and cartoon strip, the Neil Gaiman Lucifer, because Lucifer doesn't lie. And Lucifer gets upset because everyone says he's a liar. And he's like, I don't lie. I only tell the truth. Everybody hates the fact that I tell the truth. And I bring out the worst in people by telling them what their truth is, what they really are. But that's all Samael does. And so Samael is doing his job because we don't want him to do his job. And God doesn't even want him to do his job. So God distracts him. God goes, Samael, what about Job? Look over at Job for a second while I help the Israelites. So that's why Job does this thing with Samael, with getting punished, and God lets Job suffer a little bit. So Job did something really great. He was a distraction for us so we could leave. This also goes back to this idea that Job was there during this time, that Job was one of Pharaoh's counselors, that Job is a contemporary for Moses. Okay, well, he's also, as we just read in this weird Midrash, he is a distraction to allow us to escape. So Samael doesn't look at us. And this is all part of God's plan, if you will. It gets weirder, I promise you. This paragraph, one of the weirdest.
Israel had other angel adversaries besides. Uzzah, the tutelary angel of the Egyptians, appeared before God and said, O Lord of the world, I have a suit with this nation which you have brought up forth out of Egypt. If it seems well to you, let their angel Michael appear and contend with me before you. The Lord summoned Michael, and Uzzah stated his charges against Israel. O Lord of the world, you did decree concerning this people of Israel that it shall be held in bondage by my people, the Egyptians, for a period of 400 years. But they had dominion over them only 86 years before the time of their going forth had not arrived. If it be your will, give me permission to take them back to Egypt, that they may continue in slavery for 314 years that are left, and your word be fulfilled. As you are immutable, so let your decree be immutable.
That's weird. So the Egyptian angel Uzzah, and again, this is this idea that every nation has its own angel, just doing their job. I'm just doing my job. I'm in charge of this group, my group. God, you promised my group they get Israelites for 400 years. You told Abraham that. You said it. Stick to your word, God. You said 400 years. They've actually only served 86 years, which is weird because this goes back to how do we calculate how long the Israelites were actually slaves for? 400 years really doesn't seem to have passed. It only seems like it's a few generations. So 86 years actually seems a little closer to what they were, how long they were enslaved, at least according to the generations that they've had. Because again, if Levi has a son who has a son who's Moses' father, then Moses is only a few generations removed from Jacob and Joseph and that generation of Levi. So seems like it's maybe more like that. So God has maybe speeded up against his own word how long the Israelites were supposed to be slaves for. So that is the contention that the angel of the Egyptians is making here. God, you said it, you got to stick to your word. They deserve it. We don't know really what they've done yet to deserve it, but maybe they're prepaying for other things that they've done. That's something that the rabbis seem to be okay with it. Sometimes the Israelites suffer so that they get out of the suffering that they're supposed to have had. That again, you prepay. The suffering is prepaid. That's an interesting idea, which is fairly hopeful that we get bad times before the good times. I guess it's one way of making sense of really horrific things, but God, you promised it. And if they're going to get out of it, you better be a very good case for why they get out of it. And here comes our angel.
Michael was silent, for he knew not how to controvert these words. And it seemed as if Uzzah had won his suit. But the Lord himself espoused the cause of Israel. And he said to Uzzah, the duty of serving your nation was laid upon my children only on account of an unseemly word uttered by Abraham. When I spoke to him, saying, I am the Lord that brought thee out of Ur of the Chaldees to give this land to you to inherit it, he made answer, whereby shall I know that I shall inherit it? Therefore I did say to him, your seed shall be a stranger. But it is well known and manifest before me that they were strangers from the day of Isaac's birth, and reckoning thence the period of 400 years has elapsed, and you have no right to keep my children in bondage any longer.
Yeah. So God says, I've recalculated. I figured, they've really been, I said they'd be strangers, and they've been strangers since the time of Isaac. We're going to go back that 180 years of his life, that time of Jacob's life. And if we add up that time, they get credit for time served. That's really what happens. What's interesting, of course, is that Michael doesn't say a word. Michael does not do his job. He's kind of like that attorney that gets up and says, I'm attorney for the prosecution. I mean, I'm the defense attorney. That didn't just happen, did it? That was a strange moment. Michael does not do his job here. It's weird because, of course, there's no reason for Michael to have, other than it gives God a chance to come in and right away say, I'm changing the rules. It's my game. I make the rules. I decide how long it is. And yes, I'm going to stick to my words, but I'm just using my words differently, which is, I didn't say they had to be slaves. They had to be strangers, and they had to be at a weekend. And you know what? Isaac was weak. All of his time he spent not necessarily as a slave, but he worried about the Philistines. He worried about the Canaanites. He worried about the people in the land. And you know what? I'm counting that as slavery time too. So God just says, I'm interpreting myself a little differently, and I'm going to I'm letting this happen. The bondage is over. They're never going to, you don't tell me that they still owe time. They don't owe any time. So that is one way that the rabbis come to this understanding of, doesn't seem like 400 years. Where's the 400 years, guys? And so this is how they came up with it. They backdate it to basically the time of Abraham. And again, God also kind of here says, you know what? That was a pretty harsh decree. I mean, it's only because Abraham said, how will I know? I mean, he was a little doubtful of me. Again, the rabbis have in another place were slaves in Egypt because Abraham went down to Egypt when there was a famine. If Abraham only had faith and stayed in the land, I didn't tell him to go down to Egypt. He went down to Egypt, gave up on the land. And that's why they get to be slaves in Egypt. There's a measure for measure there. All right, let's get to the big scene, the big show, the sea splitting.
God spoke to Moses saying, why do you stand here praying? My children's prayer
No, my
has
close friends call me Rob. So
yours. For thee there is nothing to do but lift up your rod and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. Moses replied, you command me to divide the sea and lay bare the dry ground in the midst of it, and that you did yourself make it a perpetual decree that the sand shall be placed for the bound of the sea. And again God spoke to Moses, you have not read the beginning of the Torah. Ah, yes, I did speak. Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together in one place and let the dry land appear. And at that time I made the condition that the waters shall divide before Israel. Take the rod that I gave to you and go to the sea upon my errand and speak thus. I am the messenger sent by the creator of the world. Uncover your paths, O sea, for my children, that they may go through the midst of you on dry ground.
Yeah. So the rabbis definitely connect this miracle to creation. Because what God's doing now is messing with the forces of nature. And the rabbis, as much as they have a very vivid imagination, they also don't like things that go against the order. And God clearly has an order to things. And if God is going to mess with the natural order, maybe God had a plan all along. And, well, God right here also wants to make sure Moses stops his praying and gets to work. The sea knows what to do. The sea knows what to do. And let's see what happens, because the sea is a little anthropomorphized here. The Red Sea is, well, let's look at what happens.
Moses spoke to the sea as God had bidden him, but it replied, I will not do according to your words, for you are only a man born of woman. And besides, I am 3 days older than you, O man, for I was brought forth on the 3rd day of creation, and you on the 6th. Moses lost no time, but carried back to God the words the sea has spoken. And the Lord said, Moses, what does a master do with an intractable servant? He beats him with a rod, said Moses. Do thus, ordered God. Lift up your rod and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it.
All right, so let's finish the next paragraph too.
Thereupon Moses raised up his rod, the rod that had been created at the very beginning of the world, on which were graven in plain letters the great and exalted name, the names of the 10 plagues inflicted upon the Egyptians, and the names of the 3 fathers, the 6 mothers, and the 12 tribes of Jacob. This rod he lifted up and stretched it out over the sea.
Wow. So that gives us a little bit more of this rod, which is definitely in the scene. Moses lifting the rod over the waters. You remember it from Charlton Heston. It's a pretty vivid thing, holding that rod over the sea. Well, we get a little description of the rod. Rod's magical. Got a lot of power. The rod is actually like the first thing created. And therefore has the power of creation because it's actually older than the sea. So the sea is kind of, number one, laughing at us because we're not as old as the sea. We have no power over the sea. The sea is older than us. It's 3 days older than us. So the seas are they're not intimidated by humans. Interesting idea. But also, again, Moses doesn't really know what to do. He's just following God's orders. Whatever God tells him, he's going to do. This staff has God's name on it, has names of the plagues, has names of the tribes. What is interesting, it also has the names of the mothers and the fathers, but not Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, but also Bilhah and Zilpah. So here we have a midrash that also includes Bilhah and Zilpah. You don't see that a lot. You don't see that every day. The 6 mothers. It's about time we recognized Bilhah and Zilpah. I remember in rabbinical school, I've mentioned this before, we had a rabbi that was studying with me, rabbinical student, who made a very persuasive argument that why did we add only Rachel and Leah? Why didn't we add Bilhah and Zilpah? Why do we only name the 2 official wives of Jacob? Now, arguably, all of us are really only descendants of Leah, or most of us. We don't know who the descendants of what Benjaminites and Ephraim and Manassites are still around, but most of us are descendants of Judah, and then Levi, who are descendants of Leah. But it is a valid point. If you're going to add Rachel and Leah, why don't you add Bilhah and Zilpah? So there are mothers too, or the mothers of Israelites. So here we have a midrash that their names got on the staff. Definitely deserve to be on the staff then. There were a lot of descendants of Bilhah and Zilpah, the Danites, the Naphtalites, all these other tribes that are, descendants of Bilhah and Zilpah. Anyway, it's an interesting midrash because the staff, we get a description of this rod, the rod of God, God's rod, whatever you want to call it. But this rod is Moses's only to hold for the time being, because it went back to the beginning of time. It's a rod that is there at the beginning. A lot of interesting stuff about to happen here at the Sea of Reeds.
The sea, however, continued in its perverseness, and Moses entreated God to give his command direct to it. But God refused, saying, "Were I to command the sea to divide, it would never again return to its former estate. Therefore do you convey my order to it, that it be not drained dry forever. But I will let a semblance of my strength accompany you, that will compel its obedience." When the sea saw the strength of God at the right hand of Moses, it spoke to the earth, saying, "Make hollow places for me, that I may hide myself therein before the Lord of all created things, blessed be he." Noticing the terror of the sea, Moses said to it, "For a whole day I spoke to you at the bidding of the Holy One, who desired you to divide, but you refused to pay heed to my words. Even when I showed you my rod, you remained obdurate. What happened now that you skip hence?" The sea. That's
Yeah,
Shakespeare.
Keep going.
Shakespeare, ferry skip hence.
For sure. Keep going.
The sea replied, "I am fleeing, not before you, but before the Lord of all created things, that his name be magnified in all the earth." And the waters of the Red Sea divided, and not they alone, but all the waters in heaven and on earth, in whatever vessel it was, in cisterns, in wells, in caves, in casks, in pitchers, in drinking cups, and in glasses. And none of these waters returned to their former estate until Israel had passed through the sea on dry land.
Yeah, it was, you've always thought it was just the Sea of Reeds that parted. This was crazy water times, crazy water. Water was parting all over the place. Um, the sea didn't want to do this. Very clear, the sea did not want to part. I am not moving. I like where I am. I don't want to part. It's not good for me. It's painful. All that. I don't need this. Now, the Torah does say explicitly that this went on all night, that God, commanded Moses to do this. Moses is holding his rod over the waters according to the Torah all night. All night, this is happening. And the rabbis interpret this to be that God could have had it just, happen, which again, in the movie, they don't show that really in the Ten Commandments. It goes against the drama of the scene that Moses sat there all night with his hand over the water going, part already, part already. I told you got to part. That's what it says happened in the Midrash, kind of what it says in the Torah, that it was all night, but never in a movie do you have that. It's always holds up the rod, waters part. It's not what the Torah says happened. And at least one kinds of, understanding of it would be that it takes that long for the waters to part. The waters needed that much time to kind of gather and, do their
Add
thing.
a pack.
Yeah, back. The Midrash goes a different way, which is that no, they just didn't want to do it. The water didn't want to do it and doesn't do it until eventually is like forced into it. And again, that this is a miracle that just affects everything. Everywhere there's water, it's crazy. The waters go nuts all around the world as this is happening. So that's really cool too, which is, no, this is not just one place. The waters went everywhere crazy. Again, the water doesn't want to do it. It's painful. It's not what it's supposed to do. It hurts, if you will. It hurts. I don't want to be hurt. Water doesn't want to not be itself. Okay. It gets weirder. You thought it was weird now? Is weirder because we got the water doing its thing. Now let's read this part.
The angel Gabriel was eager to drown the Egyptians during the same night, but God bade him wait until early the next day, until the hour of the morning watch, when Abraham had made himself ready to set out the sacrifice of his son. Gabriel succeeded, however, in holding back the turbulent water about to sweep over Israel. To the wall of water on the right, he called, "Beware of Israel, who will receive the law in time to come from the right hand of the Lord." And turning to the wall of water on the left, he said, "Beware of Israel, who will wind the phylacteries around their left hand in time to come." The water behind, he admonished, "Beware of Israel, who will let the tzitzit drop down upon their back in time to come." And to the water towering in front of them, he called, "Beware of Israel, who bear the sign of the covenant upon their bodies."
Uh-huh. What do you see in this one, folks? Hello? What's interesting about this one?
The water's behind them. We always show it going side to side.
Well, that's true. The water is literally all around them.
Mm-hmm.
But what else do we have here? We have Gabriel.
Yes.
I love this. Anytime you give me some angels, my mind definitely goes to angel stuff, right? So I gotta figure out what is going on in this scene. What is going on in this scene with Gabriel? Anybody?
Gabriel's supposed to announce the Messiah.
Yeah.
That's
Anybody else? Yeah, Gabriel is the name literally Gavriel means the strength of God. He's announcing the messianic era, but also to some extent wants to get things done. He wants destruction. he is going to blow that trumpet and he wants some bloodshed. This is a theme that makes Gabriel a powerful angel, but also a fairly destructive angel and a scary angel sometimes. And this is an idea that, Gabriel just wants to do what he does. He wants to destroy. Gabriel is the angel of Sodom and Gomorrah. He's the angel, fire and brimstone. That's Gabriel. That's what Gabriel does. This idea that angels do their job and want to do their job, just want to do their job. This is what I do. Gabriel wants to do this. So Gabriel is anxious. He's eager to punish the Egyptians. He wants to do his thing. And God has to say, cool off, Gabriel. Gabriel, hold it. Let me do my thing. I promise you, you'll get to your Egyptians. You'll get your destruction. Just calm down. But this idea that Gabriel wants to do his stuff is an interesting idea. By the way, for crazy angelology people like me, one of the greatest depictions of this, just because he is who he is Christopher Walken doing Gabriel in The Prophecy. Now, the movie's 25 years old, so it's been a long time, and it did not do very well in the theater or with critics. But anytime you've got Gabriel being played by Christopher Walken as a psycho angel wanting to kill people, that's good stuff. I think it's that makes the movie worth watching just by itself. Gabriel wanting to bring about the end of the world, because that's what he does. It's his thing. Let me do my thing. I've been waiting for thousands of years, is Christopher Walken's issue in the movie, saying, I want to do my thing. I need to do my destruction. I need more cowbell. No, I need destruction. And so that's what, in the movie, he actually is evil because, he's too focused on destruction and he wants to do his thing, even not giving people a chance to do the right thing, which is to repent, to do teshuvah. So if Gabriel is bent on destroying everybody so much, maybe at a certain point, he just thinks about destroying everybody. So this does exist in our literature, if you will, our mythology, that Gabriel wants to punish. Get me some bodies. That's what Gabriel's wanting to do here. So I said, it's a little weird, but again, what do we have going for us? Well, we're Israel, and that circumcision is our calling card, if you will. That is our get out of the water free card. That's one of the things you got going for you is you're not going to get drowned here. All right. Well, that's an idea, by the way, that they were circumcised in Egypt. All right, here we go.
God caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind, the wind he always makes use of when he chastises the nations. The same east wind had brought the deluge. It had laid the Tower of Babel in ruins. It was to cause the destruction of Samaria, Jerusalem, and Tyre, and it will in future be the instrument for castigating Rome, drunken with pleasure. And likewise, the sinners in Gehenna are punished by means of the east wind. All night long, God made it to blow over the sea. To prevent the enemy from inflicting harm upon the Israelites, he enveloped the Egyptians in profound darkness, so impenetrable it could be felt, and none could move or change his posture. He that sat when it fell could not arise from his place, and he that stood could not sit down. Nevertheless, the Egyptians could see that the Israelites were surrounded by bright light and were enjoying a banquet where they stood. And when they tried to speed darts and arrows against them, the missiles were caught up by the cloud and by the angels hovering between the two camps. And no harm came to Israel.
Wow. Well, it does say the winds blew. That was part of the sea, was the winds blowing on them. And so the winds in the ancient world had their place. The winds were oftentimes anthropomorphized, and you see drawings of the winds. You see them in synagogues, because in the corners of those famous zodiac motifs that we have, we oftentimes also have the seasonal winds in the corners. If you look them in the corners, Rosemary, you probably know the name of those winds.
I know the Greek names, but I don't know the Hebrew ones.
No, I know. So what are the Greek names?
I think, let's see. Boreas is the north wind, and Zephyr is the west wind, and I'm blanking on the names of the east and the south.
One of them is like Aeolus. No, Aeolus is the one who
Aeolus is the guy who had the wind.
he takes care of the winds.
Yes.
Yeah, Boreas is the northern wind, and Zephyr, I remember. That's true. I don't know all the names of the winds. Well, you were good for two. That's pretty
Good for
darn
two.
good, Rosemary. Yeah, there are pleasant winds, like the west wind. Zephyr is considered a mild wind. I'm sure somebody can look it up on Google right now, the names of the other winds. But yeah, the east wind is not a good wind. It's the wind of destruction and bad stuff. It always has been, and it always will be. It's the east wind. By the way, Judith's looking it up right now. Just so you know, my friends who are still in California, but most of you have lived in California, Southern California, we have winds.
Mhm.
Santa Ana's, right?
I don't know.
Guess what? They're east winds.
Mhm.
Not that I'm comparing them, but they oftentimes bring destruction. And the Santa Anas are inland winds that blow over from the east, inland winds that blow from the Great Basin, hot air. And again, oftentimes they are winds of destruction. So what do we take away from this? You don't want to deal with the east winds.
You have Boreas, which is north, Notus, which is south, Zephyrus, which is west, and Eurus, which is east.
Eurus.
Eurus.
Yeah. Yeah. For us, the east winds are those are not good. Those are destructive winds, which would come out of the desert, right? In Israel today,
Zephyrus egg with the sway to breath.
we have our really bad winds are the southern winds, or the well, actually I'd say in modern Israel, modern Israel, we talk about Khamsin. And the Khamsin is a wind from, it's an Arabic word, if you can kind of hear the word Khamsin, is a hot, dry wind that, it's blowing from Arabia. And usually, again, that would have been the east, further east into Israel. But it literally, Khamsin means 50. I'm not sure why Khamsin is 50, why that's the bad, but the bad winds are the equivalent of El Nino in the Middle East. There, you don't want Khamsin, so not a good thing. Destructive winds. So the winds would oftentimes be destructive. I think because this next scene, which is actually walking through the Red Sea, which is also kind of a weird scene, and more angelology, folks. I was hoping we'd get to the really great scene of what the angels say when we're walking through, but we'll pause here. This is right about the time we're coming to the end. I'm hoping that again, as we cross the Sea of Reeds, it'll take us into a brighter tomorrow for us too. I hope everybody has a chance. Now we're officially in the month of Adar to do something that's going to give you some joy, give you some happiness. Adar is a time when we're supposed to kind of come out of the winter. We're supposed to start to see the possibilities of spring. Obviously, Purim is only 10 days or less than 10 days away, and it is a time of celebration. And a time of, it's 9 days. It's a time of frivolity and even having a drink or two, according to tradition. But it's a time of really letting loose and being happy. So definitely a time during the whole month of Adar where we're supposed to do stuff that makes us happy and brings us joy. And again, maybe even more so, because again, this time last year, we didn't know what was laying in front of us. Maybe we would have had, it was happening because it was happening in China. I have texts from my friends in China at the end of January telling us, pay attention to what's happening. And we didn't. But this year, let's hopefully find things to celebrate the fact again that people seem to, the death rates and the infections are going down, things are starting to open back up, and whatever we can find. And even if we are having a hard day, that we try to find some stuff to make us laugh, whether it's through a funny book or a funny movie or something that gives us joy. I hope people can start celebrating this month with some laughter. And if you're having a hard time doing it, join us for the escape room this Saturday night. We're going to have some fun at the escape room. If you've never done an escape room, this is a virtual escape room, but it's the same principle. Use your mind to unlock the clues and get out of the puzzle that you're in, virtually in this case. And then, man, if you want to laugh, wait till you see the people that are participating in this year's Purim spiel, which includes our own Judah Stolnitz, who is participating in Purim this year. I don't even know what to say. I've seen some of this and it's very funny. So I hope to see you guys soon. Everybody, again, either tomorrow night for Torah study or 7:00 or Shabbat coming up. But again, be happy. It's Adar. That's what we're supposed to say during this time too. Be happy. It's Adar. Be happy. All right, everybody. Be happy and healthy. Take care. See ya. Bye, everybody.